This recording will walk you through how to do the close reading assignment, which is the first building block. So you'll probably start out on our Blackboard in the announcements section. And if you head over to assignments, that's where you'll find BB1. And it's the same place where you've done your reading quizzes. So you can do a couple of things here. You can go ahead and download the document here. You can open it. You can click on it to download it. You can also go ahead and open the assignment and you'll see some useful information. So you have all of the information about what to do with this assignment. The rubric, which I highly recommend, you click on that and have a look at it because this is a very detailed explanation of what I'm looking for in the close reading assignment and what I'll be grading. So definitely look at that once you've had a chance to see the assignment itself. When you're ready to submit this assignment, you will come here and click Browse My Computer, and you'll choose a document formatted in either .doc or .docx file format and upload that. I cannot accept any other file formats, and that includes PDF and .pages documents. So if you use a Mac, note that most of the time Macs will save your Word documents as .pages, and I cannot open those file formats. So make sure that you convert your .pages document to a .doc or .docx document before you submit it. Okay, so now that you know where to access the assignment and how to do it, I'd like to actually show you the assignment itself. So you are going to be conducting a close reading of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. A close reading, as we've talked about, is, when you look closely at the text to try to understand something more about it. And it's a complex process, but it's not mysterious. And this assignment will help walk you through the process so that you can then incorporate close readings into the rest of your assignments this semester. So in the assignment that you will download and open, you want to save it in the file format that we'll go over below. But first, I just want to walk you through the content of what you've got here. I've got the goals and the outcomes, and then I've got a model here. So I've done a model close reading of a passage in Beowulf. So this is from the Babel. You can flip back and look at it, but I've also transcribed it here. This actually needs a little quotation mark. There we go. So the passage is at the very end of Beowulf, and it's the story of the guy who's thinking about discovering a burial mound. And he says, "And they buried torques in the barrow, and jewels, and a trove of such things as trespassing men had once dared to drag from the hoard. They let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was." Now, the first step of close reading is to determine the literal meaning, and this is what the text says. So a lot of times when we approach literature, we feel like we're supposed to figure out what it all means, and it's all mysterious, but really the first step is just, what is it saying? Like, what literally is going on in the passage? So here in this passage, it literally says that people buried necklaces, jewels, and other treasures in the barrow or grave. So barrow is another word for grave. And if you run across any words that you're not familiar with what they mean, just go ahead and look them up in the dictionary. Or sometimes our textbook will have a note about what they mean. So the treasure stays underground, covered by earth, and is useless to men. Treasure has always been this useless to men. This is simply my summary of what the passage says. Now the next step is to notice. So what jumped out when I read that passage? What jumped out to me? Now this is going to be personal, so what jumps out to me will be different from what jumps out to you. But in my model close reading, what jumped out to me was that I noticed that this passage depicting Beowulf's memorial mound has a lot of images of dirt and earth, and also images of treasure. So I just felt like they were talking about the ground a lot. So in step 3, we start gathering our observations, try to put the pieces together and see what we can understand about the things that we notice. So what can we understand about dirt or earth and treasure? So I tracked the earth imagery and identified both nouns and verbs that evoke the earth or the ground in some way, and then prepositions that point to the underground. So the verbs that I found were buried, dragged from, and gone. And that gone is gone to earth. The nouns were barrow, ground, gravel, and earth. And then the prepositions were in the barrow, under the gravel, to earth. So everything seems to be connected to earth in some way. I mean, just a lot of the sections of that passage. And based on the volume of words referring to the earth and referring to ground, combined with the references to graves, burial, and the underground, this passage seems very interested in burial and bodies being returned to the earth. Now, I also tracked the treasure imagery because that was the other thing that jumped out to me, as you'll recall. And there, that was mostly nouns, so there weren't so many verbs or prepositions about treasure, but there were all these nouns. So torques, which are kind of like big gold necklaces, basically. Jewels, trove, hoard, treasure, gold. It's kind of a lot of words about treasure. And all of the treasure words, as I noted, are nouns, and the fact that they're all nouns contrasts with the earth words, which were a variety, nouns, verbs, and prepositions. And there are far fewer treasure words than there are words about the earth. So proportionally, the passage is more about earth and dirt and burial than it is about treasure, but treasure also seems to be important. And in step 4, this is where we start analyzing those observations. Like, what can we learn from the fact that there's more about dirt, but there's still some about treasure? I'm trying to figure out how it works. And so this is where you really want to lay your logic out step by step and just walk yourself and your reader through it. So this is how I've laid out my logic. Most of the earth words are about burial. The repetition of both burial words and treasure words associates the two together. Because there are more burial words than treasure words, though, the treasure seems subordinate to burial, as if burial is more important than treasure. Also, all of the treasure words are nouns, which are things rather than actions. And the final line of the passage indicates that treasure is as useless to men now as it ever was. So these are the beginnings of my analysis. I haven't necessarily tried to figure out what it all means yet, but I'm starting to put the pieces together and think about why the dirt words might be more common than the treasure words, and in the next step we start to interpret this and think about the meaning. So here we're comparing the relationship between things that I noticed and the content of the passage. And remember, the content was what we summarized in that first step. It's what the passage says. Now, the relationship between the burial words and the treasure word agrees with the content summary I wrote because the treasure is less important than the burial. The passage sets up treasure as pointless for men and depicts it as lying next to a corpse in the grave. Yeesh. The final line indicates that the treasure has always been as useless as it is in the grave. The grave is simply the place where the pointlessness of treasure becomes clear. So now I'm starting to explain and interpret what this relationship is between the dirt and the treasure. So the dirt of the grave is what helps the reader understand how truly useless treasure is, because obviously a corpse is not going to be using treasure, but in reality, even living people can't really do anything with treasure. Treasure is always useless. That's what this passage is saying. I don't personally have anything against treasure, just saying. So step 6 is where we connect. We identify what that comparative relationship can tell us about the larger context of the passage. And here I found that the comparative relationship, the treasure is talked about in a different way from how characters talk about treasure. So when I noticed in step 5 that this passage is indicating that treasure is not just useless to dead people, but is useless to everyone, you might have been like, that is not at all what the rest of Beowulf seems to say. Like, the rest of the text seems to be super into treasure. Although we talked a little bit about how the episode with the dragon shows the way that treasure is tied up with management and like being a good king and all that, but it also kind of starts that final episode with the dragon. So anyway, here's how I lay out my connection between the comparative relationship and the larger context. This passage becomes important to Beowulf as a whole because the lords are frequently described as a treasure giver or ring giver. The whole society of the Danes and the Geats depends upon the give and take of the lord and his retainers, where the lord provides treasure and the retainers defend the lord. If treasure is useless, though, then the society is structured on something useless, and that seems like kind of a big deal. And so in step 7, that's where we identify what is the big picture. How does the larger context that we determine in step 6 help us understand the text as a whole? So how does this potential undermining of treasure as a basis for society, how does that help us understand the text as a whole? So the narrator's description of Beowulf's funeral mound, with its focus on burial and treasure, questions whether Beowulf and any of the members of this society actually accomplished anything useful throughout the text, which is a little bit depressing. This bleak observation is reinforced by the woman's lament that predicts the war and destruction about to be wreaked upon the Geats now that their lord is dead and cannot defend them. The treasure does nothing to keep them from dying. And we talked about how Beowulf has been hoarding his treasure instead of giving it to the people. And that was like, oh, maybe he's a bad king. And yes, that's still true, but honestly, this passage is pointing out that really, even if he had given the treasure to people, that doesn't protect them from, marauding Swedes or anyone else who's going to come and attack them. And in reality, treasure does nothing for them, which is just such an interesting way to think about the text of Beowulf, because it's in such a contrast to what the characters are usually saying. Okay, now for you are going to be assigned a passage from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and you're going to use those steps I've just walked you through to translate the passage into your own words, to notice what's happening in the passage, and then identify how that passage affects the reader's understanding of the text as a whole. Save your answers, save this document in this file format. So your last name, first initial, and then BB1. So for me, because my last name is Aldebol-Hazle, that's what I type in, then K, that's my first initial, and then BB1. Now again, it has to be in .doc or .docx file format. These are the passages, and you'll be assigned those in a separate thing not happening in this video. And then these are some of the figures of speech that are in these passages. So you don't have to talk about these if something else is jumping out at you, but these are all there. And then the definitions for these are also in your textbook, in that glossary that we talked about on Wednesday. So when you're ready, when you've got your passage and you've read it, you begin completing this assignment by simply typing your answers here. So I think the passage says, and so on. So I didn't leave huge spaces here because you are going to be completing this digitally. So anyway, you'll complete all 7 steps, and by the end, you should have a good idea of what your passage is doing and how it can help you understand the text as a whole. And you will have completed a close reading of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. As usual, if you have any questions, you should ask me in class, come to my office hours, email me, post something in the Q&A forum in the discussion section of Blackboard. Any of those are great options. So hopefully you found this video helpful. And feel free to return to it if you want to review any of the content or the way I conducted the close reading of Beowulf.